My bad. Outside of that, we have a couple visitors I can see. I see a couple new faces that I haven't seen before. And we encourage you guys to, at the very front, whenever you walked in, y'all are probably given a yellow card. We encourage y'all to fill that out if you can, and then just leave that on your table. We'll take care of that. And that gives us a chance as pastors to do some follow-up with you guys. So we just encourage y'all, if you haven't gotten a yellow card, feel free to find any of our greeters in the back when y'all are exiting, and we'd be happy to hand one over to y'all. Outside of that, I do have one more special announcement. So if you guys didn't hear, PJ had left us and is going on to another job. So we were looking for an administrative assistant. And we have, since then, we have concluded all of the interviews and we have come to a final decision. And Janine Basinger, right over here, is going to be our new administrative assistant. We're really looking forward to her joining us in the office and helping us make this a little bit more of a better environment, or not a better environment, but just work a little bit easier. I think we could definitely use the helping hand while PJ has been away. And we thank you so much, Sarah Halpin, who's been in the office for the last couple weeks in PJ's stead. So thank you, Sarah, so much. Janine's going to be starting with us on the Monday of next week, so pardon our dust. And for this upcoming week, we are going to be kind of without an administrative assistant for a little while, so understand if we are going to be a little slow this week. But let's go ahead and pray before we get started. So as we bow our heads, dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this time. We thank you for the worship that we got to hear earlier. We thank you that we had an opportunity to remind ourselves of the Trinity and who you really are, how beautiful you are, and how precious it is to sing to you. I pray that as we go into this time of teaching, that for each and every one of us, that we can open up our hearts and be willing to listen. And God, I pray that you can use me as a mouthpiece today. I pray that it is your word, not mine, that you can completely remove me out of this. And I just want your word to be said. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right. Well, as you guys probably know, my name is Jordan Bolt. I'm the youth and worship pastor here, and I'm not the typical guy that's up here. I have a lot more hair than he does. So I'm filling in for him. He's off on an Emmaus journey this weekend, so he will be back, but I'm going to be filling in today, and I'm super excited. And one of my favorite things is it seems to be a tradition of what I do at the beginning of most of my sermons. This, I think, is my fourth or fifth one now. And at the beginning of every one, I kind of give you guys a picture. And that picture is usually of me, and it says, hey, this is what I used to look like in the context of whatever I'm going to be talking about. So today, I have a picture for you guys, and this is what I looked like when I was a freshman in college. You can hit it, Sarah. Yeah, oh. Yeah, I'm definitely giving a little smolder right there. I've been practicing that one. Sydney's seen that face a time or two. So this is me, freshman year of college. This is 2014 in the fall. That was my freshman year of college. It was 2014, which is crazy to think that that's almost 10 years ago now. So that makes me feel old. I can only imagine what some of y'all are feeling. So another thing that I was doing as a freshman is I was working at Sonic Drive-In. I'm sure a lot of you guys have been there. This is me and my assistant manager, Norma. Just to give y'all a little bit of this is what I looked like back then. I was definitely a lot cleaner shaven, and I still had the little swoop going on, and I tried my best. But I loved working at Sonic. I was there for about 3 years. My favorite drink is a Big Red with vanilla. Trust me, try it. It is really, really, really good. And I was the guy that would always be known where he's at. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, Jordan's over there. That's because I was cruising around as a freshman in college in this little beauty. Yes, I used to drive a bright yellow 1970 Volkswagen Beetle. I love that thing. That was a project that me and my father worked on even when I was 6 years old. And he said, this is going to be your car whenever you get your license. So I drove that thing for quite a while until it kind of died. So it's sitting in a garage right now waiting to get repaired, but I love that thing to death. And it was always a thing, oh yes, I know Jim, yeah. But there was always a thing of saying, where am I going to see Jordan first or am I going to hear Jordan first? Because this thing is very bright and very loud. So This is all to give you guys some context of where I'm at freshman year of college. This is what I looked like, where I was going. This was fall of 2014. And when you're a freshman and when you decide to step out of high school and going on to the next phase of your life, you're faced with a huge decision. You're faced with a decision that says, what am I going to do with this freedom? What am I going to do now that I'm going to be stepping away from my parents' house? I'm going to be probably living with some roommates. I'm going to have my own apartment, maybe a own house if I'm lucky. But I'm going to have all the freedom in the world to do what I want to do what Jordan wants to do. What is Jordan wanting to do in this time? And one of the biggest decisions is, I don't have my mom giving me rides to church anymore on Sundays. I'm going to have to drive myself to church, if I'm actually going to do church, if that's something that I'm going to pursue, if I'm going to continue that. I have a choice of saying, am I going to make my faith that I've been working on all throughout middle school and high school by going to church or being a part of youth groups, am I going to make that actually my own and not just my family's? I'm sure some of you guys probably remember the time that y'all made that decision. Well, for me, I decided I was going to continue to pursue God, and I was going to make this faith my own. So I went church shopping, and I found a church called Grace Bible Church off of Anderson Street in College Station. I'm sure if some of you guys have ever been there, you'll probably know that place. They have a couple different campuses now. And one of my favorite things about going to that specific church is that they had a freshman-specific ministry that was only for freshman students. That's the only way you can get in. No transfers or anything like that, only for freshmen. And it was a ministry called Doulos. Doulos. I actually have the very first shirt that they gave me. It's right on here, Doulos. I don't know if you can see it. And I loved this ministry. It was an opportunity for me to sit back, receive, and get some guidance from some sophomores, juniors, seniors, and older, younger adults. And I love this. But y'all got to be asking to yourselves, why call it doulos? What's the point of doulos? It's such a weird word. Have any of you guys ever heard that in any other context before? Just doulos? It's definitely a word that, it sounds cool to be the title of something, but it's always going to bring on this question. Well, what is doulos? Well, this is going to be the main topic for today. We're going to be talking about doulos. And I'm a little hesitant, but I'm looking forward to what God has planned. So what is doulos? Well, doulos is a word in the Greek language, and in the New Testament is used about 124 times. And the Bible often changes this word when it comes to translation as servant. And I'm not quite the biggest fan of how this is translated, I'll be honest. Because where they really see it is it's right up here. You see doulos, or the Greek spelling of doulos that's up on the screen, translate to bond servant. And bond servant, well, whenever you try and break that down, is one who is subservient to and entirely at the disposal of his master, a slave. Doulos is a bondservant is a slave, doulos is a slave. I want to make that clear. Doulos equals slave. If you were to translate it in Greek right now, a lot of people on Google, if you were to do it, it would say a slave. So why are we having a freshman ministry saying, I'm ready to put on a shirt that just says slave? Well, I think that this is an important thing to talk about, no matter how young or old you are, of what this relationship with Christ is going to be in the future. And I'm a little discouraged by what a lot of Bible translators do nowadays. Because a lot of them, when you're looking at your Bible, it doesn't use the word slave anymore. And only in physical moments where it says that there's a physical person that is called a slave is where they actually write the word slave. But if they talk about anything else, we're serving or doing something for another person, they always put a servant. And I don't like that. Because it's using doulos. They're just calling it a servant. Because they don't want to make you think that it has anything to do with having a master. That I know a lot of you guys hear about you're the lost sheep, that you are one of a kind, that God has wonderfully and beautifully made you. And then you take all of that beautiful imagery and you say, oh, but you're also a slave. That's going to be pretty hard to swallow sometimes. So a lot of translators, they actually change that to servant, so it would be easier to swallow. But I know it's very important to know that there's a difference, because a servant does work for someone else, but a slave belongs to someone else. A servant can choose what he does and who he works for and for how long, but a slave has no choice of his own. He lives for one thing only, and that is to do what his master wants. Well, where do we see this? Where do we get this whole bondservant thing? Why are a lot of people using this? Well, I looked it up, and it looks like it comes from our Hebrew Bible, which is the Old Testament, and it comes from Exodus chapter 21, verses 5 through 6. And there's this brief little thing that Moses is doing right here. And I'm going to read it on the screen. It says, "But if the slave plainly says, 'I love my master, my wife, and my children,' I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall bore," it was covered up, "his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever." This is where we see the Hebrew word for abed, which is translated to bondservant, which is often used as doulos. But what is happening right here? Well, for a lot of you guys, this probably doesn't make any sense. This is a Mosaic law. This is Moses trying to give context to anybody who has these slaves, because back then, whenever you had a slave, whenever you bought them, they would work for you for 6 years. 6 years. And then on the 7th year, they would be let go, completely free. And they don't have to pay anything. They just work for that amount of time, and on the 7th year, they're gone. They can go. But there would often be some servants who are like, I can't make it on my own after this 7th year. I don't got anywhere else to go. So a lot of them would sometimes come forth to their master and be like, can you take me in? And Moses is giving them context, saying, this is what you're supposed to do. If the servant comes to you and says that he loves his wife, because often slaves had wives, and sometimes they made children, and they wanted to not go free, they're willing to stay. But that means, at the very last line, that he shall be his slave forever. That's what a bondservant is, somebody who is a slave forever. We often see there's quite a lot of men who have been, or a lot of men in the Bible who are seen as these servant-type roles. Because I'm sure a lot of you guys kind of think, why would this slave context, this just sounds so demeaning, this sounds so hurtful. Why would I want to be this? Why do I want to accept this? Why do I want to put on a shirt that says it? Well, can I tell you that Abraham was this? In Genesis chapter 26, verses 24, it says that, "And the Lord appeared to him, and on the same night said, 'I am the God of Abraham, your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake.'" This is also where abed, that bondservant word, is used. We know that Joshua, he was also talked to be a bondservant. We see in Joshua chapter 24, verse 29, it says, "After these things, Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old." I'm sure you guys can imagine David. David was also seen as this in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 5. I think if Sarah's got it. Is there a verse there, Sarah? You're good. There you go. Oh, well, that's Isaiah, but that's okay. I think I probably skipped the David one. Isaiah is up there. He was also a person who was seen as a servant. And then the Lord said, "As my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign and a portent against Egypt and Cush." You know, all of these men that we see here that I just gave you an example of, I know that they were fast and quick, but I gave you these examples to tell you that these are people that accepted the role of a bondservant. And they saw it as something that was noble, that it was an honorable position to have, to be somebody who would serve the Lord, to be somebody who would be a slave to the Lord. Because in actuality, I know that a lot of people just don't want to talk about slavery because it's a scary topic. We don't want to get canceled. You know, we don't want people to look at us and think that we're the ultimate authority on it, that we don't want people to judge us when we talk about it. But I want to be real with you guys. Slavery is all throughout the Old Testament, and it's a lot in the New as well. It's not something that we are to shy away from. And it's something that Jesus himself even talks about constantly. You know, he brings up Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, which talks about that you can't have two masters. He says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and he will love the other, or he will be devoted to one and he will serve the other. Now, Jesus multiple times in his ministry talked about the slave and master relationship. And what is he saying here? He's saying that you can work and you can slave for all of these things, all of these worldly things, or you can slave and you can work for me. And you can try to do both and put one foot in this way and one foot in this way. But eventually you're going to hate one and love the other. You know, Jesus himself, he was a man who came to this world to serve. He himself came into this place. And we have a shining example of what that looks like. We see in John chapter 13, verses 1 through 5, that it says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And during supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon says, to betray him. Keep going. And Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things to his hand, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from the supper, laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. And he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wiped them with a towel that was wrapped around him. So Jesus, what he would do is he took his outer garments and he took I'm not going to take my outer garments off. But he took a towel and he wrapped it around himself to make sure that it was close so that he could use this at a moment's notice to get down and take his water, pour it into a basin, and have his disciples' feet right here, ready to wash them. Now, does this position that I'm in right now, does this condone authority? Like, do I look like somebody who's large and in charge right now? No. No, I'm somebody who's probably as low as it gets. I'm down on the ground, on my knees. And I have men's feet in my face. And I know that my feet aren't the nicest. And I can only imagine what their feet looked like after walking for days on end with dirt, mud, sand, anything else in between. Some with sandals, some without sandals. So I'm sure a lot of those were gnarly. I'm sure toenail clippers probably weren't really a thing back then. They probably just fell off. So I'm sure you had a couple gnarly toenails there. But Jesus, he would take this water and he'd get his hand and he would just start rubbing their feet. As much as I want to bring somebody up here, I'm just not going to right now. But has anybody actually had a chance to do this yet? I know some people have. I know that for me, whenever I was in youth group, I had one of my Sunday school teachers, and I'm going to be down here for a little bit, so I apologize. I had some of my Sunday school teachers, as I was a senior, they looked at me and they said, Jordan, let's get you, and we're going to take your shoes off. And my Sunday school teacher, who was with me for, 4 or 5 years, mentored me and loved me. He took my laces all the way off, took my shoes all the way off, took off my sock, and dunked my foot into the water. Somebody that I looked to as a man that had authority, a man that had wisdom and knowledge, that spoke of the word, spoke of the Bible, and that he got down in this exact position and wiped and cleaned my feet. Can you guys imagine this being a very humbling experience? I'm sure a lot of y'all have maybe seen this. I've actually had the chance to do this myself with some of my own students in our current youth group. And every time it reminds me of how low I am on the totem pole and how amazing that it is that God still uses me. I think a lot of you guys probably are under the assumption that, I'm not that great. I don't got a lot going on. There's certainly some better people out there that can do these things. I felt that way too. But when I go through and I see this and I read this and I understand what God's doing, because what Jesus does here is he goes through and he washes their feet, but he follows it up in verses that I don't have yet. But he follows it up by saying that, hey guys, this is an example of what you are to do. This is an example. And he asks them to go and do this to one another as I have done for you. And he says that a slave is not greater than his master. And where that word slave is it's doulos. A doulos is not greater than his master. And if Jesus, who is our master, who sends us, if that Jesus will humbly serve in that way, it is even more appropriate for us, servants, Christians, called the sent ones, to do so too. So how do I do it, Jordan? That all sounds fine and dandy. I don't have a basin. I have one right here if anybody wants to do it afterwards. But how do I do it? How do I humble myself? How do I become a doulos? How do I go about and start making this change? Well, I apologize. I'm going to give you some homework because it's not going to happen in a day. And it's not going to happen just because you're listening to me. Because the first step is humility. And I got some examples of people who have humbled themselves, and I'm going to encourage you guys to go through and read the Bible where it talks about these specific people. I'm going to first bring up Moses, and I want you to read through Moses, read through his life. Where in Moses, he was called by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery into the promised land. He faced so many challenges and oppositions from Pharaoh, the people, and even his own brother. He often felt inadequate, unworthy of the task, but he obeyed God and served. And he is called a servant of the Lord in Deuteronomy 34:5. Ruth, another example. She was a Moabite woman who left her homestead and followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, to Bethlehem. And after her husband died, she worked hard to provide for Naomi and for herself by gleaning the fields of Boaz, a relative of Naomi. And she showed loyalty, kindness, humility to Naomi and Boaz, and eventually married Boaz and became the great-great-grandmother of King David. And she's said to be a woman of noble character in Ruth chapter 3, verse 11. I'm sure you guys know David. He was the youngest son of Jesse, a shepherd boy who was anointed by Samuel to be the next king of Israel. He faced many dangers and enemies, including King Saul, who tried to kill him, and his own son, who rebelled against him, and the Philistines, who waged war against him. He also committed serious sins, such as adultery and murder, and he repented and sought God's forgiveness. He served God and the people with courage, integrity, and humility. And he is called a man after God's own heart in Acts 13:22. I'm sure you guys have heard of Esther. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep giving you guys. Esther, she was a Jewish orphan who was raised by her cousin Mordecai in Persia. And she was chosen by King Xerxes to be her queen, but she did not reveal her identity as a Jew. And when she learned that Haman, the king's advisor, planned to destroy all the Jews in the empire, she risked her life and pleaded with the king for her people's deliverance. She showed wisdom, courage, humility in her actions. And she is honored as a woman who saved her people in Esther, chapter 9, verse 29. And lastly, Paul. Paul was a Pharisee who persecuted the followers of Jesus until he encountered the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. And he was transformed by God's grace and became an apostle to the Gentiles. He traveled extensively to preach the gospel, to plant churches in various regions. He suffered many, many, many trials and tribulations for the sake of Christ, such as imprisonment, beatings, shipwrecks, hunger, thirst. The list can go on. And he serves God and his people with zeal, with love, and humility. He's called a servant of Jesus Christ in Romans 1:1. And you know what's special about that spot in Romans 1:1? A servant of Jesus Christ says a doulos of Jesus Christ. I'm giving you guys all of these examples, and I'm trying to convey this message that being a doulos is necessary in our relationship with Christ. Every single Christian here in this room, if you've accepted Christ, is going through a process called sanctification, where he's becoming more like Christ. And didn't I just talk about how Christ got down on the floor and humbled himself and served others? So what are we doing to be like that? What are we doing to be doulos? To be a slave? To be one who is willing to do what his master asks? You know, when I was a freshman, when I got done with the doulos ministry, I was so excited. And I was like, I'm going to keep doing this. I want to do this. I'm going to pursue this, and I'm going to go further in. And because it's a freshman-only thing, I obviously can't do it another year. But the leadership was sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So I went to the church, and I said, hey, I want to be a leader for this ministry. This is an amazing ministry. Let me continue in this, please. They actually had a whole interview process. I went through it, answered the questions, yada, yada. Got a call a couple days later, and I was like, yes, here we go. And they said no. They said no. I was pretty beaten at that point. But I actually then got a call about another week later saying, actually, yes, but we're going to have you start something new, a part of the doulos ministry. And a lot of Emmaus people are probably going to recognize this. We want you, Jordan, and a team of about 8 people to group together during the time of doulos, and we want you to just be praying for these students and for the teachers who are teaching them. And just pray that they are willing to listen and to go forth and to love. I said, sure, I'd love to. Any chance I get to be a part of this. So I did it. I had a great time. We actually got to expand more than just praying for them. We got to learn how to really pray for people. We actually got to go to these groups and teach them how to pray. And one of my favorite things is I said, hey guys, what if we go out to the campus and we go pray for some individuals? And I'm going to grab these groups and I'm going to take them with me. As you guys can tell, I have an evangelist heart in me. So I want to go and I want to go do this. We actually ended up doing it a couple times, and it was so fruitful, and I got to see a lot of faces change just because we were willing to pray for them. And at the end of it, I was like, man, I have some ideas. Man, we can change this ministry. We can make this even bigger than what Doulos is. I can start having weekly meetings, and we can have encouragement to go out, and we can share the love of Christ to people on this campus. And I'm ready to lead this. So let me call up that church leader again, and let's get him on the phone. Let's meet up for coffee. And then I look at him, and I'm telling him all the ideas of what I want to do as a junior. And he looks at me, and he's like, wow, that's awesome. No. 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 I'm like, what? What do you mean, God, no? Don't you see that I have this zeal, that I have this joy? I want to go out and do this. Don't you see that I want to go out and do this? It sounds good, right, God? But I want to do it. I want to do it. I want it to be my ministry. I gotta admit, I am extremely grateful that God said no that day. Because if I got a yes, then I probably would still be in College Station right now. Because right after that no, I applied to Texas State on a whim because I felt like God was telling me to go somewhere else. And when I came here, I got a part of a church that used this building, which then I got to know this place, got to know Matthew Maletzko, and then I got to work in his youth ministry, which he then hands the reins off to me, and then that puts me here where I'm at today. You know, that no right there changed my life. That was a no of God being like, this isn't your plan. Stop trying to make it yours. Stop trying to go out and serve and be willing to submit to me. Are y'all willing to submit to him? Are y'all willing to say, no, God, this is what you need. Yes, Lord, I will let it go, and I will take it. You know, one of my favorite examples of doulos that I see in the Bible comes from Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. And I think it's coming up here. And it says, Paul is writing this to the church of Philippi. And he says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Jesus Christ, who through me was in the form of God. He was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And you want to know what's real special about this? Verse 7, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. That's where doulos is written. He'd emptied himself, becoming in the form of doulos, a slave, not a servant. Jesus really didn't have, the ability to say no to God. God was going to make it happen. Jesus was willing to submit and say, it's your will, not mine. And I'm going to be obedient to that will, even to the point of death, even death on a cross. Are you willing to be a doulos still?